The jungle erupted in a symphony of death as machine gun fire ripped through the thick morning mist of Guadalcanal. Corporal James Bull Patterson pressed his face against the muddy earth, feeling the percussion of Japanese artillery shells exploding mere yards away. It was August 7, 1942, and the United States Marine Corps was about to embark on their first major offensive operation. In the Pacific theater of World War II, the tropical heat was already suffocating at dawn, but Patterson could feel the cold sweat of fear mixing with the humidity that clung to his uniform like a second skin around him. The 1st Marine Division had been preparing for this moment since their departure from New Zealand weeks earlier. Operation Watchtower, as it was officially designated, represented America's first step toward pushing back the relentless Japanese advance across the Pacific. Major General Alexander Archer Vandegrift had briefed his men on the critical importance of their mission. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese forces were constructing an airfield on Guadalcanal that would threaten Allied supply lines to Australia and New Zealand. The strategic implications were staggering if completed. This airfield would extend Japanese air power deep into the South Pacific, potentially cutting off Allied forces and civilian populations from vital resources and reinforcements. Patterson remembered the general's words echoing across the transport ships during their approach. "Gentlemen, we are not merely taking an island. We are beginning the long march back to Tokyo." The weight of those words pressed down on every Marine as they prepared for what many military historians would later describe as one of the most pivotal campaigns in the Pacific War. The pre-dawn naval bombardment had been thunderous, with American cruisers and destroyers pounding Japanese positions for hours. The USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, and USS Astoria had unleashed their fury upon the coastline, their shells creating enormous plumes of smoke and debris that now hung over the island, like a dark omen. Yet as the Marines prepared for their amphibious assault, they knew that naval gunfire could only do so much against an entrenched enemy. According to combat reports later compiled by military correspondent Richard Tregaskis in his acclaimed work Guadalcanal Diary, the initial landings faced surprisingly light resistance. However, this apparent ease would prove deceptive, as Japanese forces had strategically withdrawn to more defensible positions deeper inland. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Burwell Chesty Puller, commanding the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, moved among his men with the confidence that would make him a legend. His weathered face bore the marks of previous campaigns, but his eyes burned with the intensity of a man who understood that failure was not an option. "Stay low, move fast, and keep your heads down," he growled to his Marines as they prepared to advance inland. The jungle before them stretched endlessly, a green maze of towering trees, thick undergrowth, and hidden dangers. Japanese snipers were known to be expertly concealed throughout the terrain, and every shadow could hide death. The Marines had trained extensively for jungle warfare, but training could never fully prepare them for the psychological warfare that the enemy employed. The sudden crack of a sniper's rifle, the whistle of incoming mortars, and the ever-present fear of ambush, as Patterson and his squad began their advance toward the partially completed airfield. They could hear the distant sounds of combat echoing through the jungle, a reminder that their brothers in arms were already engaged with the enemy across multiple fronts. The acrid smell of cordite and burning vegetation filled Patterson's nostrils as his squad pushed deeper into the jungle. 3 days had passed since the initial landing, and the Marines were discovering that taking Guadalcanal would be far more challenging than intelligence reports had suggested. The Japanese had not fled the island as hoped, but had instead regrouped and were mounting fierce counterattacks from carefully prepared positions. Sergeant Michael O'Malley, a veteran of the campaigns in Nicaragua, crouched beside Patterson behind a massive fallen log. His Thompson submachine gun was ready, and his keen eyes scanned the jungle ahead for any sign of movement. "Remember Nicaragua, boys," he whispered to his squad. "Charlie doesn't fight like the bandits down south. These yellow devils are disciplined, well-trained, and they'd rather die than surrender." The Marines had quickly learned to respect their enemy. Japanese soldiers had demonstrated incredible tenacity and tactical skill, often fighting to the last man rather than retreating. Their jungle warfare techniques were sophisticated, utilizing the terrain to maximum advantage and employing tactics that maximized the psychological impact on American forces. Captain Robert Bob Henderson, commanding Company C of the 7th Marines, had been coordinating with other units to secure what the Marines had dubbed Henderson Field, the partially completed airfield that represented their primary objective. The Japanese construction crews had made significant progress before the American landing, and completing the airfield was crucial for establishing American air superiority in the region. The heat was becoming unbearable. Marines were collapsing from heat exhaustion with alarming frequency, and medical corpsmen were struggling to keep up with the casualties from both combat and environmental factors. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, and dysentery was beginning to take its toll on American forces. The tropical environment was proving to be almost as dangerous as the enemy. Patterson's squad had been tasked with clearing a series of Japanese bunkers that were preventing the advance toward Henderson Field. These fortifications were expertly constructed, using the natural terrain and reinforced with logs and earth. Japanese machine gun positions were perfectly positioned to create interlocking fields of fire, making any approach extremely hazardous. As they prepared for their assault, Patterson could hear the distinctive sound of Japanese Nambu machine guns chattering in the distance. The sound was different from American weapons, higher pitched and more rapid, and it had become the soundtrack of death on Guadalcanal. Mixed with the machine gun fire were the sharp cracks of Arisaka rifles and the occasional boom of Japanese mortars seeking American positions. The jungle warfare was unlike anything the Marines had experienced in training. Visibility was often limited to just a few yards, and the thick canopy blocked out most sunlight, creating an eerie twilight effect even during midday. Sounds were muffled and distorted by the vegetation, making it difficult to determine the direction and distance of enemy fire. Private First Class Tommy Rodriguez from Texas had joined Patterson's squad just before shipping out from New Zealand. His youthful enthusiasm had been tempered by the harsh realities of combat, but his marksmanship with the M1 Garand rifle had already saved several lives. "Sarge," he whispered to O'Malley, "I count at least 3 machine gun positions in that bunker complex ahead." O'Malley studied the terrain through his binoculars, noting the carefully camouflaged positions and the cleared fields of fire that the Japanese had prepared. The enemy had clearly spent considerable time preparing these defenses, and dislodging them would require careful coordination and significant casualties. The sound of approaching aircraft caused all the Marines to look skyward, hoping to see American planes providing close air support. Instead, they saw the distinctive silhouettes of Japanese Zero fighters, their rising sun insignia clearly visible as they dove toward American positions near the beach. The night of August 21st, 1942, would forever be etched in the memories of those Marines who survived it. Patterson crouched in his foxhole near Henderson Field, now renamed in honor of Major Lofton Henderson, who had been killed during the Battle of Midway. The partially completed airstrip had become the focal point of Japanese counterattacks, and Emperor Hirohito's forces were determined to recapture it at any cost. Colonel Kyote Kawaguchi had landed reinforcements under cover of darkness, and intelligence estimates suggested that over 6,000 Japanese troops were now preparing for a coordinated assault against American positions. The Marines defending Henderson Field numbered fewer than 11,000, and they were spread thin across multiple defensive perimeters. As documented in official Marine Corps historical records, the Japanese strategy involved simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, designed to overwhelm American defenses and recapture the vital airfield. The plan was sophisticated and demonstrated the tactical acumen of Japanese military leadership. The first indication of the impending assault came from the jungle itself. The normal sounds of tropical wildlife, the chirping of insects, the calls of birds, and the rustling of small animals had suddenly ceased. Patterson had learned during his weeks on Guadalcanal that this silence often preceded enemy movement, as the wildlife sensed the presence of large numbers of humans moving through their territory. Lieutenant William Wild Bill Hawkins moved quietly among his men, checking weapons and ammunition supplies. His reputation for aggressive leadership had earned him the respect of his Marines, and his presence provided reassurance during the tense hours before dawn. "Boys," he whispered, "tonight we earn our pay. Remember your training, watch your fields of fire, and don't waste ammunition on shadows." The Japanese attack began with a thunderous artillery barrage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the island. Shells crashed into Marine positions with devastating accuracy, sending enormous geysers of earth and debris into the air. The bombardment continued for nearly an hour, and Patterson could hear the screams of wounded Marines echoing across the battlefield. Private First Class Eddie Kowalski from Chicago had been assigned to Patterson's machine gun team as an ammunition bearer. His Polish immigrant parents had instilled in him a fierce hatred of fascism, and he approached his duties with the dedication of someone fighting for deeply personal reasons. "Bull," he shouted over the noise of exploding shells. I count at least 20 muzzle flashes out there in the tree line. The jungle erupted with the battle cries of charging Japanese soldiers, banzai, banzai. The chilling sound sent adrenaline surging through every American defender. The Japanese assault was conducted with fanatical determination, with soldiers advancing directly into machine gun fire, without hesitation. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves for tactical advantage was both terrifying and tactically effective. Sergeant O'Malley S. Thompson's submachine guns hammered away at the advancing enemy, its .40-5 caliber bullets finding targets among the charging figures. Steady, boys. He roared above the din of battle. Make every shot count. The muzzle flash from his weapon illuminated the grim determination on his face as he continued firing into the mass of advancing Japanese soldiers. The fighting was hand-to-hand in many positions, with Marines using bayonets, entrenching tools, and even bare hands to defend their positions. Patterson found himself face-to-face with a Japanese soldier wielding a samurai sword, the blade gleaming in the light from burning vegetation. The close combat was brutal and personal. Unlike the impersonal nature of long-range rifle fire, Captain Henderson's voice could be heard over the radio, coordinating defensive fires and calling for reinforcements. Where the line was buckling under Japanese pressure, all units, this is Henderson Base. We are holding, repeat, we are holding. Continue mission as the sun rose on August 22nd to reveal a battlefield strewn with the bodies of both American and Japanese soldiers. Patterson surveyed the carnage from his foxhole, his uniform torn and blood-stained, his M1 Garand rifle still smoking from the night's engagement. The Marine perimeter around Henderson Field had held, but the cost had been enormous. Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Daniel Doc Murphy moved among the wounded with a dedication that would make Navy corpsmen legendary among Marines. His medical bag was nearly empty, and he had been forced to improvise bandages from torn clothing and equipment. Stay with me, Rodriguez, he encouraged the young Texan, who had taken shrapnel in his chest during the night assault. The bond between Marines and their corpsmen was forged in moments like these, when medical personnel risked their lives to save wounded warriors. Major General Vandegrift arrived at the forward position shortly after dawn, his presence inspiring confidence among the exhausted defenders. His weathered face reflected the strain of command during one of the most critical battles in American military history. Gentlemen, he addressed the assembled company commanders, we have passed the first test, but this is only the beginning. The enemy will return, and we must be ready. The strategic importance of holding Henderson Field became increasingly clear. As the battle progressed, American engineers had worked frantically to complete the runway, and the first American aircraft had landed just days before the major Japanese assault. These planes, a mixture of Marine Corps fighters and Navy dive bombers, were already proving their worth in interdicting Japanese supply operations. Lieutenant Colonel Puller had distinguished himself during the night fighting, personally leading counterattacks that restored the Marine defensive line. At several critical points, his leadership style was direct and inspirational, earning him the fierce loyalty of his men. Marines, he told his assembled battalion, we came here to fight, and by God, we're going to keep fighting until every Japanese soldier on this island is dead or captured. The Japanese dead were counted in the hundreds, testament to both their courage and the effectiveness of American defensive preparations. Enemy bodies lay in neat rows, where machine gun fire had caught advancing formations, and individual Japanese soldiers could be found within yards of Marine positions, showing how close the night assault had come to success. Private Kowalski had been wounded during the final Japanese assault, but continued fighting until medics forced him to accept treatment. His dedication exemplified the spirit of the Marines. Defending Guadalcanal, men who understood that failure meant not just personal death, but strategic disaster for the Allied cause in the Pacific. The supply situation was becoming critical. Japanese naval forces controlled the waters around Guadalcanal during nighttime hours, making it impossible for American ships to deliver supplies. After dark, this period, which Marines dubbed the Tokyo Express, saw Japanese destroyers and cruisers racing down from their bases to deliver reinforcements and supplies while bombarding American positions. Radio communications with higher headquarters revealed the broader strategic picture. Admiral Chester William Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, had committed significant naval resources to support the Guadalcanal operation, but Japanese naval strength in the region remained formidable. The outcome of the campaign would depend as much on naval battles as on the fighting ashore. According to intelligence reports reaching Marine commanders, Emperor Hirohito himself had declared Guadalcanal to be of critical importance to Japanese strategy in the Pacific. This meant that enemy reinforcements would continue arriving, and each successive battle would likely be larger and more desperate than the last. Patterson cleaned his rifle methodically, knowing that the weapon's reliability could mean the difference between life and death in future engagements around him. His fellow Marines performed similar maintenance tasks, the routine providing a sense of normalcy in the midst of chaos. October 13, 1942, brought a new horror to the defenders of Henderson Field. Patterson huddled in his reinforced foxhole as Japanese battleships unleashed their fury upon Marine positions. The bombardment was unlike anything previously experienced on Guadalcanal. Massive 14-inch shells from the battleships Congo and Haruna crashed into American positions with devastating effect, each explosion creating enormous craters and sending shockwaves through the ground. The Japanese had brought their most powerful naval units to bear against Henderson Field, determined to destroy the airstrip that had become such a thorn in their supply operations. For over an hour, the massive naval guns pounded Marine positions, turning the carefully prepared defenses into a moonscape of craters and twisted metal. Sergeant O'Malley had been wounded during an earlier engagement, but refused evacuation, continuing to lead his squad despite shrapnel wounds in his left arm and shoulder. His experience and leadership were invaluable to the younger Marines who looked to him for guidance during the most desperate moments of the campaign. "Keep your heads down, boys," he shouted over the thunderous explosions. "This too shall pass, and when it does, we'll still be Marines." The psychological effect of the battleship bombardment was enormous. Many Marines had never experienced such concentrated firepower, and the continuous explosions created a sensory overload that left men shaking and disoriented. Hospital Corpsman Murphy worked tirelessly to treat cases of battle fatigue, understanding that mental wounds could be as debilitating as physical injuries. Major Gordon Bell, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, coordinated the defense from his command post near Henderson Field. His communications equipment had been damaged during the bombardment, forcing him to rely on runners to maintain contact with his companies. The breakdown in communications added to the confusion and made coordinated defensive actions extremely difficult. The morning after the bombardment revealed the devastating effectiveness of Japanese naval gunfire. Henderson Field was cratered and seemingly unusable. With wrecked aircraft scattered across the runway like broken toys, Marine positions had been pulverized, and casualty reports indicated that nearly a quarter of the defending force had been killed or wounded during the night. Despite the destruction, Marine engineers and Seabees worked frantically to repair the airfield. Their efforts were heroic, often conducted under enemy fire as Japanese aircraft strafed the runway throughout the day. By afternoon, the first American planes were able to take off from the hastily repaired strip, demonstrating the resilience and determination that would characterize the entire Guadalcanal campaign. Captain James Davidson, a Marine Corps fighter pilot flying an F-4F Wildcat, described the scene below as he took off from Henderson Field. "The entire perimeter looked like the surface of the moon. I don't know how our boys survived that pounding, but they did, and they were still ready to fight." His aerial perspective provided a unique view of the battlefield that would later prove valuable for tactical planning. The Tokyo Express had become a nightly nightmare for American forces. Japanese destroyers and cruisers would race down from their northern bases, deliver supplies and reinforcements, bombard American positions, and withdraw before daylight brought American air attacks. This pattern of nighttime harassment was wearing down American morale and making it increasingly difficult to maintain combat effectiveness. Patterson's squad had been reinforced with replacements fresh from the United States, young Marines who had completed basic training but lacked combat experience. Private First Class Robert Bobby Chan, a Chinese-American from San Francisco, brought enthusiasm and determination to the squad, but Patterson knew that combat would quickly transform the eager recruit into a hardened veteran or a casualty. The food situation was becoming desperate. Supply ships could only reach Guadalcanal during daylight hours, when American air cover could provide protection from Japanese attacks. This limited supply window meant that Marines were often on half rations, and medical supplies were critically short. Many Marines had lost significant weight, and diseases like malaria and dysentery were becoming increasingly common. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese General Harukichi Hyakutake was preparing a major offensive designed to recapture Henderson Field and drive American forces into the sea. The scale of the planned attack was unprecedented, with estimates suggesting that over 20,000 Japanese troops would participate in the assault. November 12, 1942, marked the beginning of what would later be known as the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, a series of engagements that would determine the ultimate fate of the island. Patterson could hear the distant thunder of naval gunfire as American and Japanese fleets clashed in the waters off Savo Island, the outcome of which would determine whether Marine forces ashore would receive reinforcements or face annihilation. Admiral Daniel Judson Callahan commanded the American naval forces in a desperate night battle against a superior Japanese fleet. The fighting was conducted at point-blank range, with destroyers and cruisers engaging each other with guns and torpedoes in a chaotic melee that left both fleets severely damaged. The sacrifice of American naval forces prevented Japanese battleships from bombarding Henderson Field, but the cost was enormous. Lieutenant Colonel Puller had been promoted to command a composite battalion formed from the survivors of several Marine units. His force was tasked with defending a critical section of the perimeter against the expected Japanese ground assault. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Puller's confidence never wavered. "We've got them right where we want them," he told his officers during a pre-battle briefing. "They have to come to us, and we'll be ready." The jungle fighting had intensified as Japanese forces probed American positions. Searching for weak points, Patterson's squad had become expert at jungle warfare, learning to move silently through the undergrowth and to identify Japanese positions by subtle signs: broken vegetation, disturbed earth, or the faint scent of Japanese rations. Private Chen had proven himself during his first major engagement, demonstrating the courage and initiative that would make him a valuable member of the squad. His ability to speak Japanese, learned from his grandmother, had proven invaluable for interrogating prisoners and translating captured documents. "Bull," he reported to Patterson after examining captured enemy papers. "They're planning something big for tomorrow night." The American defensive preparations were extensive, taking advantage of lessons learned during previous Japanese attacks. Machine gun positions were carefully sited to create interlocking fields of fire. Artillery concentrations were pre-planned for likely avenues of approach, and communication systems were reinforced with backup equipment and personnel. Hospital Corpsman Murphy had been recommended for the Navy Cross for his actions during the October battles, but he remained focused on his primary mission of caring for wounded Marines. His aid station, located in a reinforced bunker near Henderson Field, had treated hundreds of casualties, and his skill and dedication had saved countless lives. The night of November 13th brought the climactic battle for Henderson Field. Japanese forces launched coordinated attacks from multiple directions, supported by artillery and mortars that had been carefully positioned during the preceding days. The assault was conducted with typical Japanese ferocity, with soldiers advancing despite enormous casualties from American defensive fires. Patterson found himself in hand-to-hand combat with a Japanese officer wielding a katana sword, the traditional weapon symbolizing the warrior spirit of the Imperial Army. The fight was brief but intense, ending when Patterson managed to bring his rifle to bear at close range. The personal nature of such encounters made the fighting particularly brutal and emotionally draining. Sergeant O'Malley's position came under intense pressure as Japanese infantry attempted to break through the Marine perimeter at what they perceived to be a weak point. His Thompson submachine gun ran dry during the critical moment, forcing him to fight with his pistol and eventually with an entrenching tool taken from a fallen Marine. His leadership during this crisis exemplified the fighting spirit that would make Marines legendary. As dawn broke on November 14th, it became clear that the Japanese assault had failed. The Marine perimeter had held despite enormous pressure, and Japanese casualties were catastrophic. Enemy dead lay in windows before American positions, testament to both their courage and the effectiveness of Marine defensive preparations. The strategic situation had shifted decisively in favor of American forces. Japanese naval losses during the recent battles had crippled their ability to reinforce and supply their troops on Guadalcanal, while American reinforcements continued to arrive. February 9, 1943, marked the end of organized Japanese resistance on Guadalcanal. Patterson stood on the beach where he had first landed 6 months earlier, watching as the last Japanese soldiers were evacuated by destroyers under cover of darkness. The campaign that had begun with such uncertainty had ended in complete American victory, but the cost had been enormous. The statistics of the Guadalcanal campaign told a story of sacrifice and determination that would inspire future generations of American military personnel. Over 7,000 American service members had given their lives to secure this single island, while Japanese losses exceeded 24,000 killed, wounded, or missing. The naval battles alone had cost both sides dozens of warships and thousands of sailors. Major General Vandegrift, now wearing the Medal of Honor awarded for his leadership during the campaign, addressed the assembled survivors of the 1st Marine Division. His words carried the weight of shared sacrifice and mutual respect forged in the crucible of combat. Gentlemen, you have proven that American forces can defeat the Japanese army in sustained ground combat. This victory will echo throughout the Pacific and provide hope to millions of people living under enemy occupation. Patterson had been promoted to sergeant and awarded the Silver Star for his actions during the November battles. The decoration meant less to him than the knowledge that he had served honorably alongside men who had become closer than brothers. The bonds forged during combat were stronger than any civilian relationship, based on absolute trust and mutual dependence. Private Chen had been killed during the final Japanese counterattack in January, dying while carrying wounded Marines to safety. His sacrifice exemplified the courage and dedication that had characterized the entire campaign, and his memory would be honored by those who survived. Patterson kept Chen's personal effects to send to his family in San Francisco, a responsibility he took seriously. Hospital Corpsman Murphy received the Navy Cross for his extraordinary heroism during the 6-month campaign. His citation read in part, "For extraordinary heroism while serving with the Marine Rifle Company during extended combat operations on Guadalcanal." Despite continuous exposure to enemy fire, Petty Officer Murphy repeatedly risked his life to provide medical care to wounded Marines, often crawling across open ground under machine gun fire to reach casualties. The strategic implications of the Guadalcanal victory were enormous. Japanese expansion in the Pacific had been halted, and American forces now possessed a major base for future operations against enemy positions. Henderson Field, now properly completed and expanded, served as a launching point for air attacks against Japanese installations throughout the Solomon Islands chain. Lieutenant Colonel Puller had become a legend within the Marine Corps, his leadership during the darkest days of the campaign serving as an example for future generations of officers. His promotion to colonel came with command of a regiment preparing for future amphibious operations against Japanese-held islands. The lessons learned on Guadalcanal would prove invaluable during subsequent campaigns. The jungle that had been the scene of such desperate fighting was already beginning to reclaim the abandoned battlefields. Tropical vegetation grew rapidly over foxholes and bunkers, and within months, only careful observers could identify the locations where men had fought and died. Nature's resilience provided a strange counterpoint to human destruction. As transport ships prepared to carry the surviving Marines to Australia for rest and refit, Patterson reflected on the transformation that 6 months of combat had wrought in himself and his comrades. They had arrived as young men eager to prove themselves in battle. They departed as hardened veterans who understood the true cost of victory. The Guadalcanal campaign had demonstrated that American industrial capacity and military training could overcome initial Japanese advantages in experience and equipment. The victory provided a template for future Pacific operations and proved that island hopping campaigns could succeed against determined enemy resistance. The legacy of Guadalcanal would inspire American military forces for generations to come, proving that ordinary citizens could rise to extraordinary challenges. When their nation's survival was at stake, the Marines who fought in those fetid jungles had earned their place in military history, and their sacrifice had secured the foundation for ultimate victory in the Pacific War. Patterson boarded the transport ship carrying his rifle and the memories of fallen comrades, knowing that his war was far from over. The road to Tokyo would be long and bloody, but the victory at Guadalcanal had proven that American forces could defeat the Japanese Empire. The first step on that long road had been completed, and the Pacific belonged once again to those who fought for freedom.